A3. It has two items right here. So basically it's matching to what we have seen in the order that we just have created. And what I will do here, I select those two lines, and on the top here, I will click on the supply and demand, and I say add to a new load. So basically, this is a scenario where I'm manually creating a load and adding the order lines to it. And here, all I need to do is select a load template ID. It's basically defining the constraints in terms of the size of that shipping container. So it has some maximum and minimum values on the length and the weights and things like that. So I will have to select a template. That's the only field that is required. So I will select the 20-foot container right here. Here are my two order lines that I'm going to add to that new load, and I'm just going to click on OK. So what you will see here is those two lines disappear. So what that means, they have been planned. So I have other lines that are unplanned, so they're sitting here. So I'm free to use that workbench to create loads manually for new or for other orders, and basically do my planning from this point on. So this is a scenario, as I said, of manually creating loads for our orders. So where can we see our loads right now? So there is a dedicated all loads view that we're going to open right now. So here's the list of our loads. And what I want to mention here is that if you do not see your order in a load planning workbench, so let me just go back here. Sorry, guys, jumping back and forth. If you do not see the lines that of the purchase order that I created, I'm trying to just give you some tricks on what may be missing if you do not see the purchase order lines or the sales order lines or transfer order lines that you have created in the load planning workbench. What can be potential cost for that? So the first thing is actually a transportation management checkbox on the product. So let me explain what I mean. So here's the item that I have added, right? So I'm going to click on the item number, just basically open the released product details. And in here, of course, there are a bunch of fields, but the first prerequisite for you to be able to do that is use transportation management processes checkbox has to be set to yes, right? You can see that for my product T100 and T200, that is true, right? So that's a first prerequisite. You have to have that checkbox set to yes. As you will see here, my product here is not using advanced WMS storage dimension group, right? It's assigned to normal site warehouse storage dimension group. It's not assigned to the advanced warehousing storage dimension group. So we don't have to have advanced warehousing if we want to just plan it using transportation management. I think it's an important point, right? So I don't have to enable advanced warehousing for an item if I would like to plan it and in the load, right? So all you need to have is that transportation management processes checkbox has to be set to yes. And if it's not, that may be one of the reasons why you do not see it in the list. The second reason may be the warehouse from which you are shipping it from. So let me go back to my purchase order here, and let me click on that warehouse 24. This is a warehouse that I'm shipping it from, or in this case, I'm shipping it to, right? Because this is a purchase order. So what I'll do here is I will just view details on this one. What that warehouse needs to have, it needs to be set to use warehouse management processes to yes. If you have created a purchase order line for the warehouse that has this checkbox off, you will not see the line for that order in your load planning workbench. So I know it's a bit confusing. On the item, all we have to have is a transportation management checkbox set to yes. For the warehouse on that line, we need to have that use warehouse management processes to yes, right? So this is another main reason why you may not see that line in the load planning workbench. All right, so we did that. And the third most kind of common example of why you will not see that is that maybe that order already been added to a load, right? In this case, you see that because that purchase order that we just created is no longer visible in my load planning workbench. And the reason here is because we already added it to the load. So the load planning workbench only shows you the lines of the orders that have not been, sorry guys, have not been added to a load yet. So just again, those are the three main scenario where you may have issues with seeing that item inside the load planning workbench. All right, so just wanted to kind of give you that brief kind of pointer here, some tricks on that. So let me go back to my loads here, right? So let's find the load that we just have created, right? So usually it's the one on the bottom, right? So let's just double check that. So I'm going to click on that number right here. So I see my order 383. Let's just go back to our purchase order. Yes, it's 383. So we know this is a load that we need. It has those two lines, T100, T200. So far it does make sense. So what is the next step in our process? If you remember, we already created a load. So the next step is for us to rate and route that load, right? So how can we do that? Okay, so let me just close this. Well, we need to navigate to transportation tab right here on the top. And under rating and routing, we're going to click on rate route workbench. All right, so we're going to click on that. So here is the criteria, and you will see here that it's actually pulled in from an order. So we see a from address. In this case, it's an address of our supplier, our vendor, Acme Office Supplies, and their shipping address is somewhere in Houston, USA. We also see a to address. In this case, it represents the address of the ship to warehouse, warehouse 24, and it's actually warehouse somewhere in Tacoma, USA as well. And we also have all the information like weight, volume, and warehouse actually copied from that purchase order, right? So this is a criteria, one of the criteria that will be used for us to rate and route that load. So how do we do that rating and routing, right? So we have multiple options here, but I will talk mostly about rate shop. So the rate shop allows you to see all eligible shipping carriers that can service that load. That means they have been set up to be able to service that destination and that origin line. So we will click on rate shop, right? And on the kind of on the surface, there is not much going on. So you have to kind of be prepared to scroll down a bit, and that's where you will see route results. Before, that section was empty, right? So we did not see anything. Only when we clicked on the rate shop, we saw the options, right? The other one is the rate, right? So that's the one that will pick the best rate for you, right? It will only show you one option right here. So in this case, it's truck carrier. But if you click on the rate shop, you will see all the applicable options right here. All right. So now let's talk about why do you see only two? So what I see only two applicable shipping carriers. One is called truck carrier, and the second one is called LTL. But there are more shipping carriers set up in the system, but not all of them are visible. Why is that? Well, because we have this checkbox, hide exceptions checked. What that means is it's going to hide any shipping carrier that for some reason has quote unquote exception. That means they are not eligible to service that destination, right? So let's uncheck that checkbox, and that's right away shows us a bunch of different things, bunch of different carriers here. So we see air, flour, point, zero, parcel, rail carriers, but they were not all visible. So here I would like to kind of talk about why certain carriers may be not eligible, right? Because I use that word a lot, but what exactly does it mean, Alexi, right? So let me just select one of those eligible carriers, like rail carriers, and click on View Exception Details. So that's where the system will try to give you some pointers on what exactly is missing. So in this case, it could not find transit time, right? For example, if I select air cargo, look at the exceptions, it's rate-based assignment, cannot be found, right? I think that's the name, that's basically the exception message. So I would like to explain and talk about more about what may cause that exception, right? So number one is we need to understand how the loads are rated first, right? And that in order for us to do that, we need to look at something that is called Ratemaster, right? So let's take a look at the Ratemaster, and I know that this is a Ratemaster that is used for our truck carrier, shipping carrier. So first eligibility is the address needs to match in address to rate-based assignment. So we basically need to define a pair to say that origin PC, which means origin postal code, is 55425 in this example, and the destination postal code is this. If our load ship to address and the ship from address are not in this combination, that means that carrier cannot service that destination, right? So not all carriers can go from any address to any address. We need to define a list of pairs of the addresses that this specific carriers can be used. So that Ratemaster is then assigned to the shipping carrier. So each shipping carrier that we have set up will have this Ratemaster assigned to it, right? So that's an association that we have to define, and that's one of the main reasons why you may not see that carrier available for you to select when you click on the rate shop. So first you need to define the rate-based assignment. That means correct matching criteria. And to complicate things even further, each rate-based assignment may be different, right? In this case, it's a track load. So when the entire container goes from point A to point B, in this case, we just need the eligibility criteria is the ship from address and ship to address. But for other ones, it may be a different criteria. For example, there is a one that is used for the zones right here, right? So where is that? Right here. So for example, you have their rate base. So it's a different criteria, and it's really a subject for a separate session, but I just want you to understand that if you do not see it, one of the reasons is that it cannot find the address on the load does not match to the records that we see right here, and that makes that carrier that is assigned to that Ratemaster is eligible for that specific load. Another reason may be that you have some missing setups on the item itself. So you may have, for example, missing weight or missing physical dimensions or missing NMFC code. All those criteria are relevant, for example, when you do the LTL shipment, right? So if you select this LTL shipment carrier and look at the rate base, we see that we need to define a class, and the class actually represents that NMFC code or LTL code, right? So in certain cases, LTL carriers might not be showing up in the list because we forgot to set up an MFC code on the item, or we forgot to define a weight. And you can see right here that I have different prices depending on the weight. So for the LTL shipments that we will cover later on, the relevant criteria is what commodity that we're trying to ship, and the commodity in this case is represented by that class 100, and what is the weight of an item, right? Those are two important input criteria for the system to decide how much that load, the load will cost, what will be the rate for that load. And if we are missing that rate, the NMFC code or the weight on the item, that will not allow a system to calculate that rate, and therefore any shipping carriers that use that rate base will not be showing up in our list, and they will be showing up in that exception list, right? And another thing and the last thing that I'll mention on that is transit times, right? You remember we selected one of those carriers right here and it was saying missing transit times. So let me just show you this transit time engine right here. It basically defines a list of pickup postal code and drop-off postal code. I hope you guys can see it right here. So the pickup is on the left and the drop-off is on the right. And then on the rightmost column, we see a number of days. So basically what that means is we explicitly setting up and saying from one zip code to another zip code, it takes X number of days using, of course, a specific service, right? Because the same destination served by air may take less time than the same destination served by, for example, a truck. So the first thing we will need to select in this list is this carrier service, right? So we have shipping carrier, which can be, carrier ABC that provides multiple different carrier services, such as UPS ground, 1 day, express, and things like that. So first we need to define a service for which we define the number of transit days. Then we need to define a from address to address. In this case, those are represented by postal codes or the zip codes. And then we define a number of days itself. So I think it's a very complex subject that requires kind of in-depth dive into how rating is set up in the system. I will not be able to jump in all the details, but I just want you to get a sense of you need to make sure that the rating profiles, Ratemasters are correctly set up. Remember this, Ratemasters. So we have rate-based assignment set up. That's number one. Number two is depending on the rate-based assignment, we need to make sure that all the items set up in place, such as weight, dimensions, and MFC codes. And a third thing we need to ensure is that we have defined a number of transit days between our from address and to address, right? And that's not an exhaustive list of all the possible reasons why you will not see your carrier showing up in that list, but that's a good starting point. All right. So what we will do here is I will select one of those carriers, right? So those are two eligible carriers that we have so far, right? Because we hit all the exceptions, so those are the only ones that qualify. What I will do now is I need to finalize my selection. I need to basically assign that carrier that I have highlighted to my load. So this is what I will do here. I will select that first carrier, and you can see it has a rate calculated, 29.17, and I will go through that. I will give you one example of, so for you to understand how that rate was actually calculated, right? So this is a 29.17. This is a total rate, which equals to the customer rate, which equals to the shipper rate. So we basically expect to pay $29.17, $2,917 to that carrier whenever they provide that service and ship that load for us, right? So this is an expectation. This is an estimation that we want to capture somewhere in the system. And then, so we can then use it in reconciliation process itself. So let's just kind of finalize our selection first. We like that carrier because it's cheaper than LTL, because LTL is $9,300, so it's higher. So what I will need to do to finalize it is click on Assign. When I do that, you will see a new form popping up, and that says Route, right? So we basically effectively, in that one step of clicking that Assign button, rated that load and routed that load. So for the people that follow this diagram, we are basically are just completed this third step right here. We basically rated and routed that load right here. Okay, so this is our route that was automatically created. So the top pane is the header, and the second one is are the lines. They're called segments. In our case, it's a very simple load. It has only one order, therefore there's only one segment. Go from supplier Acme Supplies to warehouse 24 address, right? But I will show you other scenarios which are a bit more involved. So this is a route that was automatically created when we assign shipping carrier with its rate to our load, right? So I'm gonna close that form. It's gonna take me back to my load planning workbench, but I've already done my rating and routing, so I have to go back again, and that's where I will be taken to my load. What happened here is, if we refresh screen a bit here and look at the header, we now see that we have this carrier assigned to that load. Before, it was wide open load. That means no carrier, no service was assigned. Right now, I have my shipping carrier, truck carrier assigned. I see my carrier service truck assigned. I see that this carrier belongs to the mode TL, which is truckload. So we basically have this assignment in place. We also see the route again. So right now, if we click on the routes button right here, we see the same route that we saw a minute ago. So this is just a repeat, right? So we basically have that load rated and routed. Okay, now let's move on down our flow. And you see the next step, step number 4, is to confirm the load, right? It's an important step. It can be done automatically or manually. There's a periodic job recently released, I think, with one of the latest updates from Microsoft. So no matter how you do that, you need to need to be able to confirm it. So let me do it manually. So I'll click on Ship and Receive tab on the top, and under Confirm, I will click on Confirm Inbound Shipment. Right, so now we see that our status has changed to shipped. That's an important step. At which point it is triggered, that's basically a very interesting question, right? Because if you have EDI integration with your carriers or your warehouses, I think that confirmation of inbound shipment for the purchase order, it should happen when you get a confirmation from the carrier that the load was picked up and en route to your destination, right? So it can be EDI transmission that triggers that step and to confirm that shipment, or it can be manual update from your carriers. No matter what it is, I think the good physical event that should be associated with confirming the load is when the shipment actually was picked up by the carrier. So what happened here when we confirmed our load? So there are two things that had happened at the same time, and we need to review them very closely. So the first thing that happened is the freight bill got generated, right? And you remember, Alexi, what is a freight bill? I don't remember it. Well, remember this match invoice to a bill? So we got a bill generated. So what is a freight bill, right? So that freight bill is our estimate charge that we have calculated internally to match to the invoice when it comes. We don't have a freight invoice yet, but we want to capture the estimate that we have generated internally, right? So the good point here is that the standard transportation management system doesn't really talk to carriers via EDI. It can be definitely enabled, and it's all set up to do so, but we did internal rating. What that means is we had internal setup tables that told us that the rate for that shipment, for that load, is $29 or something dollars, right? $2,900 or so. So what we have generated is a freight bill. So let's click on that. Here's our freight bill. It's on the left-hand side. You know, a bunch of information here, a lot of stuff here, but I think what we want to capture here is the unit price, and that's what I have highlighted here in the middle of the form. It's $29.17. This is our internal estimate based on our calculations, based on the contract that we had with that carrier. We expect to pay $29.17. Right? So this is our baseline. It can be more, it can be less, of course, but this is our baseline so far, $29.17. This is our freight bill. It only got generated when we confirmed the shipment. So if you go to the freight bill screen and don't see anything, one reason is you forgot, you did not confirm the shipment yet. Well, all right, so that's a first thing. Okay, so this is an important stat because we now have captured that estimate $29.17. It sits there for us to be able to match. Another thing that had happened, you will not see on the load, but you will see on the order itself. So let me navigate and find that PO that we created in kind of to initiate the whole thing. I think it was somewhere right here, 838. What happened here is we also added a miscellaneous charge, and I hope you guys kind of have some idea what miscellaneous charges are. They can be added to sales orders, purchase orders, etc. So what we have added here is if we open that purchase order, click on financials and look at the maintain charges, we now see this rate track base carrier charge that has 138.93. That's for the first line. All right, so 138. Alexei, I think the rate was 29.17. How come it's only 138? Okay, let's open the second line, go on financials, and do exact same thing. Maintain charges to 2,778. Right. Added it to the other amount, we're going to get 29.17. So basically, our 29.17, the total rate, were proportionally allocated to all of our purchase order lines, right? And that's what the apportionment engine is used for. There's some logic on the background that decides how to allocate that total amount of 29.17 to all the lines that were serviced on that load, right? So this is a miscellaneous charge that was added right here. Right. So what type of philosophy is used here? Well, it looks at the weight, it looks at the quantity, right? So we see here that we have a quantity of 20. That's why we have a higher amount allocated to the second line versus the first line. And also the second item is much more heavier. So that's why the amount of the charge for the second line is much bigger than the first line, right? But this is an apportionment engine, and my note of experience here is that there's not much control you have over the apportionment logic unless you are willing to customize. So there's, sorry guys, do you have any questions? No? Okay. Heard the noise. So, but no matter what you guys do, there is a standard apportionment engine logic that exists that does that allocation to your order lines. And unless you're willing to customize, you cannot really do that. But based on my experience, it's driven by weight. So the total weight of the second line is higher, and therefore the higher percentage of the charge was allocated to it. All right. So we're kind of moving along our happy path. One note: if you do not see the charge, right? If you go to your order and you go to maintain charges and that is blank, and you know that you have already confirmed that load, what could be the reason? One of the reasons here can be the terms of delivery on your line, on your order. So I'm going to open this is my PO header. I will scroll down here. And I'll want to ensure that there's a delivery terms. And this is a FOB, freight on board delivery terms, that was defaulted from the vendor. So that's why I did not have to select it manually on that order. When I click on that term, what exactly are we looking here for is add transportation charges to orders needs to be set to yes. So one of the reasons why you may not see that miscellaneous charge created on your order is terms of delivery are missing completely, because again, it's an optional field. You may forget to specify it on the order. That's a one. And number two, you may have terms on this order, but that checkbox is set to no, right? Because again, if I look at all the list of the here, you'll see that not all of my standard terms of delivery have that that have this checkbox checked, right? FOB does, but for example, cost insurance freight does not, right? So it's important, if you would like to have that charge added to an order, you need to select that term that has this transportation checkbox set to yes. And of course, the last question is, oh, what charge is that, Alexi, right? Why is it this charge and not a different charge? Because I can have different miscellaneous charges, right? So let's go back to our charge. Why was this VND freight charge used, right? Why not other one, for example, right? So because I have a bunch of other miscellaneous charges, how come that was selected, right? Well, there is a setup for that, and I'll show it to you kind of 1 second. So let me just duplicate it, tap one more time. So there is a relationship that you define, and it's done in transportation management module. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click on the miscellaneous charges right here. So that's a list that says if we have a vendor order, we're going to use this freight charge, VND charge. If we have a customer order, we're going to use this charge. And if we have inventory, which will be used for transfer orders, we're going to use that charge, right? So you need to have this defined as well. Otherwise, system will not know which miscellaneous charge to use, and therefore it's going to go and not create it. All right, guys, let's move on our happy path. So we have confirmed our shipment. Let's go back to our diagram. And now we're going to go and do this step, create freight invoice. So I will do it manually, but again, you may have that invoice coming in via EDI electronically using electronic reporting, which is a very nice tool that you will hear a lot of maybe during the other sessions for this summit right here. But this is my load. And what I will do here is I'll manually generate a freight invoice based on the freight bill. So I'll open my freight bill. Okay, this is my estimate. And you will see a button here that says generate freight bill invoice. So I'm going to click on that. It's going to say, okay, give me the invoice number, because this is a carrier invoice. So I need to use a unique number. So it's going to be 209. Let's do that. And I'm going to click on OK. So that's where the system copies the information from the freight bill. It just copies, right? It's similar to how any invoice is generated. It assumes that it matches to what you have on the freight bill and says, here's my invoice. Okay. So again, header on the top, lines on the bottom. What do I see here? So I see my invoice number, things like that. I see invoice status open. I see a bunch of information here. If I scroll to the right, I will probably see shipment, load, and route. So all this kind of relevant information. And then I will see the amount right here. So I see 2917, right? So it's basically says whatever we had on that freight bill estimate. Yes. Does anyone have a question? Maybe someone is not muted. So this 29.17 is what we expect to pay. And this is a happy pass. So what I will do here is I will not change the amount. Let's say whatever we expected to pay, 29.1760, is what we got from the carrier. Let's pretend this is an exact match, which of course probably doesn't happen, but this is a happy pass scenario. I will cover other scenarios in the subsequent kind of examples, right? So let's say this is a freight invoice, we're happy with it. What I will need to do here is then set it to ready for processing. So if you see this checkbox right here, it says invoice is ready for automatic matching. It's no. That means it's in quote unquote draft state. I'm still modifying it. Maybe it was not really, it's not ready to be matched, right? But because I'm happy with that invoice, I look at it, I will manually check that checkbox and say this invoice is ready to be matched, right? So this is what we will do here. Now the matching piece right here. So if you kind of do it this way, you basically say, all right, do I need to do matching Alexa? I see this button that says submit for approval. How come I cannot click on that? So if you click on that, you will see that it's going to say, hold on a second. We did not have anything to match it to because we did not run that matching process. So therefore, there's a big difference. It says 29.17. That's a difference. Basically, that's an invoice, but it was not matched to any freight bill. And therefore, the difference is the entire invoice amount, 29.17. So give me a reason why there is a big difference and why you want to approve it. So this is not the way you want to do it, right? You need to match it. And one of the ways to do that is do the invoice matching manually. Click on match freight bills and invoices. It's going to open that huge form. You're going to find, going to search for all your unmatched freight bills, and you're going to click on match button right here and do the manual matching, which is a way to go, I guess, but it's not very efficient, right? So instead of doing the manual matching, we would like to have a system to match it automatically for us. And this is what I would like to show you here. So I will basically go and run. There is this auto match batch process. I have to make sure that my checkbox is checked, yes. And there is this periodic job that we can execute that does the matching for us, right? It's searching for all open, quote unquote, unmatched freight bills and matching them to invoice that we have created. And if we have a match, it's going to do it for us. So let's go back to our freight invoice again. And now we see that our invoice has changed from open to ready to process. We know that we have a match on the line, right? So we know that it found the freight bill that it was kind of matching to that invoice, and it was able to match it for us. And in this case, there is no difference, right? Because the invoice amount matches to the freight bill amount exactly. But the question is, of course, how does it know how to find that freight bill to match it to? And that's what we need to, that's where we need to use this freight bill type, right? Again, this is just kind of explaining setups as we go along the process. So here is my freight bill type, and the freight bill type defines the fields that would need to be matched on the invoice and on the bill, right? Remember, we have two entities, and it's looking at the load ID. So basically what that means here, load ID on the freight invoice needs to match to the load ID on the freight bill. I think it's very logical, right? So what that requires from your carrier is to specify your load ID when they send you their invoice. This will allow you to facilitate a quicker matching process. And this is the first line, load ID, match required, yes. And the second one is a billing group ID. So each of our lines, if we go back to our kind of invoice right here, has this billing group ID. It's right here in the middle. And in this case, it says freight, right? So we have freight, bill group IDs, we can have accessorial charges, and we can have fuel surcharges, right? So basically we say that the billing group ID on the invoice line needs to match to the billing group ID on the freight bill. And once we have those two matches, then the system will say, okay, I found a match, and we now are ready to process. So what we have completed here is that second to last step of matching invoice to the bill. And now we have the last step of approve freight invoice. That's a significant step right here, and this is the last step in our overall process. But what that step does is actually generating something for us. So let me do this for us. So here's my invoice that was automatically matched, and now the status has changed to ready to process, and I will now approve it or click on submit for approval. When I do that, submit on approval, you will see that invoice disappears because the system did not have any discrepancy on the amount that we need to address. It says the amount on invoice matched exactly on amount on the freight bill. It's our happy pass scenario. No questions asked. That invoice is good to go. So now it disappeared from the list of our freight invoices. Why? Because it's approved. And you can see here this checkbox in the top left corner says hide approved invoices. Now, final step. Let's open our load 155 and let's look at what was generated. When we approved that carrier invoice, you may have guessed what had happened. We have generated AP vendor invoice journal for finance team to process, generate a payment, and basically settle that payment against that open invoice for the carrier. Each carrier is assigned to a vendor account in D365, and now we have generated invoice for that carrier. How can we see that? We'll open our load, related information, vendor invoice journals. Here's our number here, journal details. You will see here that this is an invoice journal. It has a header information. It has load ID, it has route ID, and a bunch of other information. It was automatically generated. And if we click on lines, we will see 2917. That's payable to the vendor parcel carrier, right? So this is our first line, and then it's split into two lines. Why two lines? Because we had two items. And remember, it was apportioned according to the weight. So 138 for the first line and 2778 for the second line. So this is an offset account, which is 600 something freight transportation. So this is our ledger account. But what I wanted to highlight here as well, guys, it copied dimensions. So for the people on the finance side that are interested in it, you may have remembered that our order here, it had dimensions. So if we look at our purchase order, we see that it has dimension business unit and then item group. And then on this one as well, we have item group audio, right? And these dimensions were copied to our invoice journal. So that's very important if you want to keep track of the shipping costs on the ledger level, maybe run some reporting. So we know in order for us to land that item, how much we had to pay for freight, and you can analyze it using either trial balance or maybe specific financial report that you build based on that, based on these invoices. But what the important point here is that we have this traceability in the ledger, and the financial dimensions for this automatically generated invoice journal are copied based on the source order itself. Okay, what we have done here is completed a purchase order process. And remember guys, I did all that without actually receiving that PO, right? So that PO is still approved, it's not even received. So that's an important point. Those are independent processes. Processing of carrier invoice and rating and routing that load and processing invoice is independent of the receiving of that purchase order. Of course, in real life, probably at some point we will need to go to that order and receive it because it was shipped. We probably would not pay carrier invoice unless we have received that order, that service was provided. But that's an important note for you to have here, right? I was able to generate a vendor invoice journal for that carrier without actually receiving the PO in my warehouse yet, right? It may be a good thing, a bad thing, but I think that's a flexibility, that's a current scenario, that's basically a current situation that we have. So just a note that we completed the process, and our order is still, it was not received. So now we can go through the steps of receiving that order, generating a normal invoice, not the carrier invoice, and doing our standard steps of that life, in a life cycle of that PO, right? But I just wanted to highlight that we were not required to receive that PO without, we did not have to receive that PO for us to process the carrier invoice. So this is the first scenario. This is a happy pass. And if you don't mind, guys, I would like to spend the next 20 minutes or so to cover two other scenarios. So the second one is a transfer order, and it has a different flavors because of how the transfer orders will be processed. So let's do that. So I will go and create a new transfer order. That will be the last thing that I kind of create here on the fly. I think we do have a lot of those. So we kind of, let me just open the list of all my transfer orders, click on new. It's gonna go from warehouse, I think 24. So from warehouse 24 to warehouse 22. Important point here, guys, is the shipping warehouse, remember, it needs to have advanced WMS checkbox set to yes. So the warehouse 24 is advanced warehouse, advanced WMS warehouse. The to warehouse, ship to warehouse does not have to be. It can be, or it does not have to be. But the from warehouse has to have it. The to warehouse does not. Okay. Now we're going to add T100 for this guy, and T200 for this guy. So let's ship once. That's fine. Okay. So I have created a brand new transfer order in front of you guys with transfer order 56. Remember, before we had to go and manually create a load, and manually add the lines to that load. But for the transfer order, we don't have to do that. The load was already created. How do I know that? Let's just kind of validate that. Let's click on the list of all the loads. And I see my load 156. It says open, not shipped. So I'm going to click on that just to validate. Yes, T100, T200, order number 56. That's order 56. That's the one we just created. So how did system automatically create that load? Well, we have an option here under transportation management parameters. So this is where I'm going to go to. And if I scroll down here, you will see that it has this load section and says automatically create loads at transfer order entry. So I have this option highlighted for the transfer orders, but I did not have it highlighted for the purchase orders. So that's why for the purchase orders, I had to create it manually. For the transfer orders, I don't have to, right? Again, it can be good and bad. I think it's the same idea of I reserve sales order lines at the order entry, or I do reserve them manual, right? Remember, this reservation, is it automatic or is it manual? Maybe it's too early for me to create that load, or it's not desired at this point in time. But the reality is, because we have this checkbox created, the load that we have created is automatically created as we enter that transfer order. And it's not to say that I cannot add lines to that load manually. It's not to say that I can remove orders from that load manually. You can do all those things. You can even delete the load and then recreate it manually, but it's just kind of something that you have as an option, and I wanted to highlight it for you. So you don't have to create the load manually. You can do it automatically, right? So this is what had happened here. And now I will go through steps faster because we already covered those in the
align with this is the put there as comment that was initially sent, not align with the template sent.
Is it a question? Sorry, guys, I'm hearing have trouble hearing the entire question.
No, it's all good. Someone was talking.
Oh, okay. All right, guys. Just, if you don't mind, put yourself on mute, and just unmute yourself if you have a question. All right, guys. So this was a load that was automatically created. All right. So what I will do here now is we'll go through the motions once again. So I'll click on Rate Route Workbench. Remember, click on look at the results here. That section is empty, no surprise. Let me click on Rate Shop. Now I scroll down. Now I see 3 carriers that are able to service that order, right, based on the address, etc., etc. What I will do here is I will select LTL carriers. So the first one, I'm not going to select trail or truck. So select the first carrier, click on assign. Remember, what will happen is that route will have will automatically be created. One thing that I'll show you here, guys, is details, right? Because now I have the rate that is composed of 2 components. So first one is the rate, and the second one is the accessorial charge, right? So this is another flavor that we're adding to that transfer order scenario, is we have 2 components to our rate. The total rate is $705, but it consists of $605 rate, shipping rate, and $100 of something accessorial. So accessorial is another way for you to add to that base rate calculation. And the way it is done, again, this is, I know it's introduction, but I want to maybe cover as many bases as I can. It's done basically on accessorial assignments here. So if you look at the accessorial assignments here, we have this detention, and if you look at this, it has the accessorial is a flat $100. So this is basically what we see here. This was accessorial rate that was automatically added when we rated and routed that load. And how do we know that this $100 should be applied to LTL carrier and not TL? Because remember, in the first scenario, it was not, that $100 was not there. We had only one component. But in this scenario, we do have two components in place. Well, there's something that is called carrier accessorial charges, and we basically define a relationship. If shipping carrier is LTL, which in our case it is, then we will use this accessorial master LTL, and the billing group will be accessorial. And that billing group accessorial will have this basically carrier accessorial charge detention, and we already saw that this carrier accessorial charge detention is a flat $100. So that's why our rate that was calculated by the system was added. You know, there was another component added to that, and we're going to see it later on as well. All right, that's one point. So let's go back here. Rate route workbench we already done. Let me go back here. Let me refresh that form. Yes, so we all updated on the load. The next step is, remember, we need to go and confirm the load. In this case, because this is outbound shipment, because this load is taking inventory from one warehouse and ship it to another, we need to confirm an outbound shipment here instead of the inbound. So now we have confirmed that. And if now, remember, once we have confirmed, we have charges added, but we also have the freight bill generated. So if we click on the freight bill for that load, okay, so that's a good example. So what I have forgot to do here, guys, is I forgot to add terms of delivery to that order, right? And that's why we do not see that's why I do not see my charges or my freight bills added. So what I have to do here is go back to my transfer order, click on the header, and that's an important point here. Under transportation, I need to select, not this one, delivery, sorry. I need to select my terms of delivery, right? Because for the vendor, we could have defaulted it, but for the transfer order, we have to select it manually, and I forgot to do that. So for my terms of delivery right here, I will select FOB. Remember, that one has a checkbox checked. Okay, let me just refresh that. Control-Shift F5. Now I will go delivery terms, FOB. Oh no, FOB. So this is an important thing for you to have. And again, you can rely on those defaults coming from the vendor or the customer. For the transfer order, those do not exist. So I'm going to save that. And on the lines, I think I'm good here. Let me just check if it's FOB as well. Okay, so let me just go back to my load, right? Let me just go and try to 156. Okay, so what I will do here is I will manually then recreate this order again. Just maybe that will be the easiest, 24 to 22. But before I do that, I'll add the lines, C100. And again, there are multiple ways to do that. I have to reverse it, but I think it's going to be quicker for me to do this way. And what I will do here is will not forget to specify terms of delivery here. So that will be FOB. I'm going to save that, right? So now I have my load created here. So let me just refresh it. So here's my load 157. That's for the new transfer that I have created. And let's do the rate route again. Rate route workbench, rate shop. Again, select LTL, 705, click on assign. So far we're just repeating the same steps. All right. And now, let me just go back to my load here. And now let me confirm that outbound shipment right here. And let me see if I have my freight bills. Oh, I don't have them yet. Interesting. Okay, so let me just, do I have this set up? Yeah, I do have it. Interesting. So maybe I did not save this. FOB, correct. So let me reverse this. Okay. Rate route workbench. Okay. see those lines yet. Okay. Interesting. So I have to go and do one thing with this then. Let me just refresh this. Oh, that my transfer order is gone. Interesting. So my entire order is gone. So 24 to 22. That's a good troubleshooting session as well, guys. So here, T200. So save. Let me go to the header. Let me specify FOB as my terms here. Let me click on lines. All right, so this is my transfer order 58. Let me see if I have a load for that transfer order 58. So 158 right here. Let me just check. Yes, this is a 58 transfer order. So far so good. Let me just route it again. All right, LTL, click on assign. That should be good. All right, and let me do the outbound. Okay, that makes sense. Interesting. So what I expected to happen here is that we would get this, maybe I'm missing something. So I would expect to get this rate route generated, and I would expect it to see it here. Oh, hold on a second. This is 155. Okay. Does it have it? Is it already automatically closed? I'm just trying to see if it was automatically shipped. Yeah, okay, so it is right here. So what had happened here, guys, is actually as I confirmed it, it became shipped and it disappeared from my workbench. So let me just look at this route again. No, it's not here neither. So what would happen here is you will have the this freight bills generated for this transfer order, and once you do, you will be able to then go and match it into the scenario where you have to kind of go through the same number of steps as for your transfer order. So I have to just look closely a bit of why exactly we have this items that did not show up here. It's interesting because I expected them to be right here, but for some reason they did not really show up here. So it's interesting. 158. Let me just look at this. Yeah, I'm just curious because my transfer order disappears. You see right now I have not deleted it, but I don't see it in the list of my orders, and I'm just curious of what had happened here. So interesting thing. So again, guys, so I think the only difference in this process will be that the load was generated automatically. That would be the only difference that I would see here, right? So here's our transfer order. That makes sense, but we did not see the freight bill. So that's probably the missing part, and I'm not sure what the reason is for that. Okay, before we complete the session for today, I wanted to, should be mode of delivery. You think so? Because I kind of, mode of delivery is already populated, but the FOB should have been selected. Oh, look at this, guys. As I was talking about this, I actually unchecked this checkbox. Remember when I was covering that and I needed to have it in yes, so that's strange. I don't know why we had this. It was my mistake. I checked that by accident, so let me check it. That was the reason, right? Because my delivery terms did not have this, did not have the checkbox checked, because as I was showing it to you guys, I think I just kind of unchecked that. So that's an interesting. So let me just do it again. I think, you know, I would be very happy if it worked, so you guys can see it. So again, very simple scenario. Let's recreate our transfer order now, right? And what I'll do here is, again, make sure that I have my terms of delivery selected. And now these terms actually do have the checkbox, yes. Okay, that's good. That was the missing part. And again, it was totally my fault. I was just talking about it and just kind of had it unchecked, I guess. So let me just look at the list of all the loads. Here's my load, 159. Let's just confirm, yes, order 59, it is correct, right? So we're going to do our rating and routing very quickly, right? And when we did that, let's do the assign. So this is our thing. And now, see outbound shipment confirmation. Yes, it's 159. And if we look at the freight bill details, yes, so now we have it. So it's a good example of where we had a terms of delivery without the checkbox checked, and we did not have the charge generated or the freight bills, right? So I think it's a good example of troubleshooting, guys. So here's our rate of 605, which was the base rate. And we also see that accessorial charge of 100. So the total is 705. Let's just click on generate an invoice. It's going to be 210. Click on OK. And once we have the invoice, we will see that it finally has two lines. It has the freight line with the billing group freight, and then we have a second line accessorial, which is an accessorial group ID accessorial, right? So that's an example of where our freight consists of two lines. And what I'll do here, guys, is just for you to illustrate. We have a tolerance of 10% on our charges. So what I will do here is for the first line, I will change the amount from 605, what we expected to pay, to something within the 10%. So let's say it's going to be, 620 or something like this, right? So I'm changing the amounts because they don't exactly match to the ones that we have generated. This is a real vendor invoice, and I'm recreating a situation where the amounts do not match. And for this one, I will change it to an amount that is much higher than 10%. So instead of 10% over, so it could be 110, I will change it to 150, for example. So two amounts do not match. The first line is within 10%, the second one is outside of 10%. I'll make sure that this invoice is ready for matching, right? So that's correct. So we have this checkbox checked. And now I'll do that auto match batch, right? Remember this thing where we just click on this periodic job because I don't want to manually match it. And I will kind of let the system to use the rules that it has to match it to the unmatched invoices. So now I'm going to open my freight invoice. And it's interesting. What we see here is it's not ready for process. It says pending review. And then we look at the lines, we see the first line is ready to process. So this first line is good to go. The second one is says pending review. And that's because I put it over 10%. And you may ask me, Alexei, why exactly 10%? Where is that coming from? Well, it's coming from something that is called Ratemaster. So if we look at the Ratemaster right here, we can define different minimum tolerance levels and the maximum tolerance levels. And you can see right that for my shipping carrier LTL, which I was using right now, I have minimum tolerance 10% over and 10% under. That's why I told you that I will put the first amount within 10% and the second amount outside of 10%. So we basically have a first discrepancy of $20 because it's within 10%, the system can reconcile. And how can it reconcile it? It can reconcile it based on that reason code. So for my overpayment, which in this case will be overpayment of $20, it's going to use this reason code. And if we look at that reason code, it has some criteria like which account that difference will get posted to, whether or not the carrier will get paid with that checkbox, and we say that the carrier will get paid. So basically that's defined by the reason code. So that $20 can be automatically reconciled using that reason code. But the second one, it says ready for pending review. That means the system cannot reconcile that difference because that difference is greater than 10%. So what we need to do as we click on submit, now the system says, hold on a second, the first line I can take care of based on the Ratemaster. I know which reason code to use. But for the second line, where we have this discrepancy of $50, you have to tell me which reason code to use, what to do with that. Is it approved and therefore the carrier will get paid? Is it damage claim and therefore the carrier will not get paid, etc., etc. So you can select any of those reason codes to manually reconcile it and then click on OK. And only after that, our invoice will get processed and approved. And once we do that, we'll be able to go to the list of all the loads. I think it's, what was it, 159 or something like this, 159. Here's our load. And now we can look at the end result. We can look at the vendor invoice journal. We can look at journal details, guys, and then click on the lines. So we have a much more complex entry here. The reason here is because we have discrepancies. We had two components, but the bottom line is that the carrier will get paid $620 for the freight, even though we expected $600. And then basically he will also get paid $100 for that accessorial charge, even though he charged us $150. The $50 overage will not get paid to the vendor because we have selected the reason code that basically specify that should not be done. Right, guys? So unfortunately, I did not have time to cover another scenario where the loads are created automatically using something that is called load building template, right? And it may be a subject for another follow-up session, or if you have any specific questions, do not hesitate to ask me. And I think we have a few minutes left. So Raz, do we open the floor for the questions, or we'll move on to the next session?
Also, we only got one last minute left. So we can see if we got some questions here.
Yes. So before I think we can conclude for now, right? The load building workbench is the one that will be used to create these loads, and I think it's a very simple demonstration, and I'm not going to take more than a minute right here. We need to select something that's called schedule route and click on the proposed loads. That's where the system looks at all open sales orders in this case and says, oh, these orders can go together, and it's going to suggest us proposed load that has some lines in it. And if we're happy with those suggestions, we can just click on create loads. So this, of course, utilizes some setups on the background, but it's something that can be set up to allow you to automatically create, or at least the system to suggest you those loads. So it's something that I briefly touched on right now, but unfortunately do not have time to go into details. So guys, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will pass it on to Raz to facilitate the next session. Thank you. Let me just stop.